Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast, where I, Dr. Jim Hoven, your host, get a chance to meet cool people that are truly making a difference in the lives of others. And today, my guest is Mr. Matt Osborne, and he's the principal, founder, and rock star of Osborne Law. Now, Matt's here as a very special guest today because he is all about consumer protection law, consumer law. He's about taking care of people like me and you that sometimes bad things happen to, even when we're not aware of it, until it's really bad in the situation. So we're going to talk about the consumer law, how it affects you, and what you can do about it today. So without further ado, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I've been really interested in visiting with you, even in the few minutes before we started, talking about what consumer law is and why we need this. Because a lot of people, like I was saying to you, I never really thought much about consumer law as a whole big, like a big area. I had thought of the individual issues that you really help people with, but not as a conglomerate of one thing that all fall under that umbrella. First of all, tell us a little bit about what consumer law is and why it's so important to have a guardian like yourself in that gap, that space for us.
Yeah, so consumer law, it's somewhat broad, but it encompasses a lot of different things. It's mostly big corporations screwing people over, which happens a variety of ways. But the most common complaints we get are, false credit reporting, people who are identity theft victims where the bank doesn't want to believe them. We also do a lot of bad faith insurance claims.
Define bad faith, because a lot of people might not know what that means.
Yeah, so it's basically where an insurance company wrongfully denies your claim and invents bogus reasons to not pay out, or they lowball you. I mean, I deal with it more on the property loss side. So we see a lot of, say, your car gets wrecked and the insurance company, you take it to a body shop and they say, this thing's got to be totaled out. Well, we've got cases where the insurance company will tell the person, oh no, take it to our preferred body shop and they can fix it for like $6,000. And what they do is they just fix the body, but not the frame. And then they try to put you in a death trap and put you and your family at danger.
Wow.
So we've got some of those going. We see fraudulent transfers happening where people, like identity thieves, transfer money out of people's checking accounts, and then, the bank doesn't want to believe it's fraud. So we've got those going on as well. So.
Wow. Well, we're going to talk about all those things individually. And before we do that, I'm fascinated by, we've done 140 some episodes of the show now, and I am fascinated by people's backstory, right? On how they got to where they're at. And so you're literally a guard dog, in a sense, for people like myself and everyone watching or listening all around the country, right? You're that guy that helps us when we need it, because we didn't even know this was going to happen. How did you get into this kind of law in the first place? And first, what made you want to be a lawyer? And second, once you decided that, how did you come to consumer law as your passion?
Yeah. Well, so I didn't decide to become a lawyer for a while. I was in the Navy for 5 years.
Oh, thank you for your service.
Sure. And I was in military intelligence, and my original plan, I thought I was going to work for the CIA or the NSA. And then as I served for like 5 years, I decided I didn't want to do that. So when I was going to college at night, one of my professors was a lawyer and said, why don't you go to law school? And
because he saw something in you that made you think that, or what, was there a piece that made him go, you would be a great lawyer, as opposed to you might be a great engineer? Like, where did that come from?
Well, it was a criminal justice class, and we were reading a lot of case law, and then we would write up little reports about it, and he thought I was pretty good at it, I guess, so he recommended it. It wasn't anything I ever thought about. I didn't really know anything about lawyers, but I decided to do it. And then so I graduated law school at Michigan State, and I decided to open my own firm like the day after I passed the bar exam. And I had no idea what I was doing.
None of us opening a business do on our first business. I promise you
Right.
that. That's funny. Let me go back on one thing, because I'm really big on mentorship, on leadership, accountability. Those are just things that are really important to me. And I've seen these principles be effective across industries, across businesses, across organizations. This person that believed in you and saw something that you didn't know yourself. Did you ever reach back out to him after you became a lawyer or anything and say, man, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. That helped guide me. Was that part of your process?
Yeah. His name is Theo Watson. He's actually a lawyer here in Colorado. He does like government contracting law. And yeah, we still stay in touch, and he's a great guy. So.
Isn't that cool? Like, I know I've reached out to coaches that I've had in the past, high school football coaches, other mentors, just to say thank you, because when you look back at it, there are some pivotal moments in our lives, all of us, that have taken us to our highs and to our lows, decisions, incidents, people. And man, when you think about it, what a big thing. Like, now you're able to help so many people because someone said something. I just think that's, every time I hear those kind of stories, I just got to dig in a little bit because it's so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and then how I got into consumer law. So I was kind of sitting there with no clients and no work and just hoping somebody would walk in the door.
So you just opened a general law firm. You didn't go into consumer law. You just said, hey, I'm an attorney. Here's my shingle. Let's roll.
Yeah, I would pretty much, I was willing to take anything that came in probably. And the janitor in the building I was renting walked in and said, hey, you're an attorney, right? Can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And he said, well, can I set up an appointment? I said, well, I got time.
How about now?
How about now? So he's like, he started telling me, he had paid off a bill like many years ago, and now they were suing him for it again, even though he'd already paid it. And so then I discovered this statute called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And we ended up suing that collection agency for doing that, and actually won some money. And then I just started reading all these federal statutes, Fair Credit Reporting Act and Truth in Lending Act, and there's like 10 or 15 of them. But I just kind of self-taught myself all these laws and just started seeing all these violations, and that's kind of how I fell into it.
Wow. So you became a self-taught expert in this field. Is there, this is a specialty, and obviously we do in our firm, we do predominantly personal injury work, and that is a specialty. I tell people all the time, if you were in a crash, because they'll ask me, man, I was in a crash, and what do I do? And so I'm giving them just some thoughts, both on the, with my education as a chiro, talking to them about their health and make sure this and that. And then with my being surrounded by attorneys all day long, like, look, this is what you need to look at with elements of how to take care of yourself on a legal side, talk to an attorney, this and that. But if they have an uncle who does wills and a trust, that's not necessarily a good idea to have work a PI case, because there's nuances, right? The law is not just the law applied evenly across all industries. Right. With you now specializing in this, is there a large number of consumer protection lawyers, or is that a pretty subspecialty niche comparatively to PI, family law, those kinds of things?
Right. Yeah, it's pretty specialized. I would say most states maybe have, 2 or 3 attorneys that do it. Maybe in California and New York, you might have 10 or 15, just due to the populations there. But yeah, it's very specialized, and if you don't get to the right attorney, they won't know what to do. I mean, I've had many clients call, and I'm like the 10th or the 15th lawyer they've talked to, and they say, yeah, somebody finally said, you're the guy that does this. So
that's cool feeling, isn't it? You've put that time in and earned that place to say, in this world, I can help you. Yeah,
it's a great feeling.
So cool. When you're going about looking at a consumer protection item, does it ever work where you talked about corporations kind of putting the screws to the little guy because they can, and in hopes that, maybe it's a mistake, or maybe it's a shortcut or a pattern, and they're like, oh, well, if we get caught, we get caught, but most of the time we won't get caught. We'll slap our hand, and the money we make is well worth the money we pay. Right. Do you ever find something like that happens in a class action deal where the same group does that at a large scale. And what's that process like?
Yeah, so we have discovered that. I've done a few class actions, but it's not super common with consumer law because most of these companies have something called an arbitration clause where they bury in the fine print something that says, if you can't sue us, you have to go through this thing called arbitration. And so the U.S. Supreme Court unfortunately ruled, a few years ago, those are pretty much always enforceable and that you can't do class actions in arbitration. So it's kind of a, double-edged sword.
Yeah. What about people getting, if someone does something like identity theft, that's a person committing a crime on another person. If someone does one of these things, whether it's, and we'll talk about these individually, but where a company does something wrong, whether it's a mortgage company, a credit card company, and they're creating undue stress on a person, and let's say it costs me $1,000, is the law set up to where my remedy is the $1,000, or is the law set up to where, hey, if they're going to do this, they're not only going to make up for their mistake, but they're going to have to pay a penalty for that on top of whatever the bill or the balance or the mistake was?
Yeah, so most of the consumer laws give you a couple different remedies, but usually you can get damages similar to a PI case for what we call the pain and suffering, or the stress or the loss of sleep or whatever you incurred. A lot of them also have a penalty fee of, say, $1,000 or $2,000. It kind of varies depending on the statute. And then some of them also have punitive damages, which in some cases, we've won hundreds of thousands in punitive damages if the conduct is bad enough. Would you define that for our audience if they're not sure what that term punitive means, punitive damages? Yeah. It's basically money to punish a defendant for doing something really bad. I mean, it normally has to be something that's intentional or, really, really careless, not just ordinary carelessness, but yeah, it's basically designed to punish them so they don't do it again, and for the rest of the industry to look at it and say, man, look what happened to those guys. We better make sure we don't do something like that too.
Put them on notice.
Right.
So let's go into some of the specifics of this, Matt. When it comes to consumer protection, let's talk about the things that you're seeing most. And you and I were visiting about this a little bit earlier, and I know one of the things that you're really seeing is identity theft. Would you just go into identity theft, what it looks like, some of the more common forms that it's taking right now, and then as a preventative measure, if you have any thoughts on what people can do to protect themselves from these kinds of things, I think that would be super beneficial and helpful.
Yeah. So the two basic kinds of identity theft that I see, number one is where a thief will take your name and your social and your other information, and they'll actually open up an account in your name.
How do they get that information in the first place? Like, because you see about it, protect when you're at a gas station at Costco, putting your card in. Right. If this is a debit card, cover your number and all that stuff. How do they get this stuff?
Well, there's a variety of ways. The old school method, but it still happens to this day, is they steal mail. That's one way. There's oftentimes they get it from data breaches. So when you hear these big corporations have data breaches, they get your social, copies of your ID, date of birth, all your information through that sometimes. I don't fully understand how it works, but somehow they're able to obtain a lot of this by the dark web, which I've never been on the dark web. I don't really know how it works.
We've all heard about it or seen it on like CSI or something.
Right. But they can get stuff off of there. And sometimes they'll just have pieces of your information. So they may have your name and your social, but not your date of birth. And so we've seen cases where they've guessed your date of birth. And we've seen banks let them guess 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And still let them open the account. So, wow. But yeah, that's one of the most common. You also see it a lot where a family member or a close friend will somehow access your information and then do that. I mean, we've I've had many cases where kids have opened up fraudulent accounts in their parents' name, or parents have opened up fraudulent accounts in their kids' name. We've seen cases where parents have sold their kids' social security numbers to the underground market for other people to use, and then the kid can never get credit for the rest of their life.
Wow.
I mean,
can someone get a new social security number if theirs gets used to that degree and it's tarnished, or once you're assigned, that's it?
No, there is a process you can go through with the Social Security Administration. They won't automatically give it to you. There is like a whole process you have to go through, but it is possible, yeah.
Wow. And so coming back to identity theft, you talked about some of the ways that this happens. What are some of the more common results you've seen when someone gets information and opens an account? Is it typically they start buying stuff, or is that what typically happens? They get that information, they become consumers on someone else's identity, or do they do other things?
Yeah. Most of the time in my experience, the people that do this are generally involved in meth rings. So there'll usually be a group of several people working together, and they're doing this to basically get money for drugs. But generally what they'll do is they'll go make a whole bunch of purchases at Walmart or Target or whatever retail store it is. Oftentimes big ticket electronics or gift cards, and then they'll sell them for cash. We've seen them use it to buy concert tickets. We had a case where they bought, I think, like 40 Travis Scott concert tickets with somebody's card.
Wow. And if you do find yourself thieved, if you will, by someone, and that's the case, what's the remedy? I mean, if you got a bunch of drug dealing folks and I come to you, are you going to get any money out of them if you do find them on identity theft? Or what's the remedy for me? Or is it just to tell, if they got my identity and they purchased this through a credit card, just to say, no, you don't have to pay this? Or what's the help there?
Well, most people don't really find out about it for months or years later. So oftentimes the thieves will have the statement sent to a P.O. box or some other fictitious address. And so where it usually comes up is somebody's applying for a mortgage, and then they pull their credit and they find all these fraudulent accounts, or suddenly they start getting pursued by a collection agency. So if you tell the bank you're an identity theft victim and they believe you initially, your remedy is just that you don't owe the money. And that works for some people. But where I usually get involved is when, for whatever reason, the bank or the collection agency that's pursuing you doesn't believe you. And so what normally happens is people will first try themselves to call the bank before they even think about a lawyer, and they'll say, hey, this isn't my account. They'll file a police report. They'll do submit whatever documents the bank asks them, and then the bank will say, nah, we think it's you. And then they'll keep pursuing them, refuse to take it off their credit. And then at that point, people start trying to look for an attorney, and then that's where I get involved. And so if at that point, we're usually looking at punitive damages, emotional distress, attorney's fees.
So interesting. It blows my mind that people spend so much time and energy trying to get over on other people instead of just working hard, doing their own thing and not taking advantage of someone and just doing better that way. But it's always going to be the case. So we need people like you doing that, especially acting as, what's really cool is that you can act as an intermediary between me and the person who stole my identity and the person now who's chasing me for something that's not my fault, right? So you being able to protect me from them while helping me unravel and kind of get out of this mess that I didn't even know I was in. What should someone do from your perspective? You see this all the time from the ugly side. Do you have tips for people on identity theft, services they should subscribe to, things they can do, ways that they can keep themselves safe, or monitor whether or not they are potentially victims of this crime.
Yeah. Well, as far as like services, in my opinion, most of those are kind of a waste of money. But what I think people should do is just periodically check your credit reports. So you get a free one. I think actually the only website that's free is annualcreditreport.com. And so you get one free one from each bureau a year. So what I usually tell people is, like, say, pull TransUnion, and then 6 months later pull Equifax, and then 6 months later pull Experian. Just kind of monitor your credit reports. Be on the lookout for accounts that you don't recognize, or people pulling your credit that you've never heard of, phone numbers, addresses that you've never heard of. Those are often telltale signs of identity theft. And then also on your bank statements and credit card statements, just really review those thoroughly, which I know is easier said than done. I'm guilty of it myself. I sometimes just gloss over it, but I would really watch that, because on those, if you did actually receive the statement and there's fraudulent stuff on there, there's pretty strict timelines, like 60 days normally, that you have to do something affirmatively to notify them. So
what about these things, services, like I've heard these, and I don't know if one of them is called LifeLock or something, but is that the service that you're saying, maybe it's really helpful, maybe it's not so helpful? Or those
that's the one I've heard of, and I don't really know specifically what their business model is, but all I can say is I've seen people that had their service, and I've seen people that still had their identity stolen, and they expressed to me that they didn't feel that they really got much benefit from it.
Got it.
But other than that, I don't know any specifics on, what they do, or what they claim to do.
Best thing is self-monitoring, though, from your perspective.
In my opinion,
Look at those key documents, those key pieces of information on a regular basis, i.e. your credit scores. And I like what you said of staggering them. I think I would have never thought about that. Like, I'd go, oh, you get the report and it gives you all three of them next to each other, and you just boop, 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 boop. But you're saying pick one of them in January, one of them in June, and one of them in October or something, and then redo the same ones each month, each year, like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. See, I think that's a great tip. So for those of you watching and listening, write that down. That's a writer downer, along with reviewing your statements. I think those are both critical. Let's move into another kind of protection that people need, which is these things of where mixed files, I think is what you call them, where my name, Jim Hoven, may not be that popular, but if it were Jim Smith, it would be potentially easy for the wrong Jim Smith to be reported on in a credit score or something where there's 10,000 of us, and so the reporting could get mixed. Is that kind of what a mixed file is? Right.
Yeah, a mixed file is where they take somebody else's accounts and put them on yours, or vice versa. And like you said, it's normally happens with people with common names, but it can also happen with people that have similar socials. And so the reason for that is the credit bureaus, they have very loose algorithms because it makes them more money that way. So their system will tolerate an 8 for 9 match, and in some cases a 7 for 9 match on the social security number.
Really?
So if you have a situation where somebody has a social of 2323 and then somebody else has 2324 as the last four, and let's say both of those people lived in Colorado at any given point in their lives, the bureaus will mix them sometimes. And so a lot of times people will actually mistakenly believe they're an identity theft victim in that scenario, and then we later find out, no, that's just not yours, it's somebody else's that they're trying to come after you for.
And so in that case, would they find, if they were scanning their stuff, would they find any fraudulent charges? Or no, there's not a charge issue, it's just an identifier issue where they got the wrong deal, so now they're coming after you for stuff that's not yours.
Right.
And it's just a simple matter of unwinding that and say, one is your claim, one is my claim. Is that,
right.
And that's what you would do.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also important to know for mixed files, it doesn't only apply to the traditional big three credit bureaus. So what most people don't know there's hundreds of what's called specialty credit reporting agencies. So when you apply for an apartment, there's 10 credit bureaus that only sell credit reports about apartments. When you apply for a job, there's 5, 7 credit bureaus that only sell credit reports to employers. We have a lot of cases where, like, let's say somebody's name is Jim Jones, and they apply for a job, and a different Jim Jones, who's a sex offender, gets put on their background check and sold to their employer, and then they don't get the job, or they get fired because they think that this person really is a sex offender.
Right. What happens in that case? Is there a legal remedy if Jim Jones were to get fired from his company or not get a job and say, I don't understand, they come and see you?
Yeah.
Do you get them their job back? Is someone at fault for that, for the mixed file? Is it these credit bureaus that have to pay something to make that right? Like, what happens?
Yeah, normally in that case, we would sue the credit bureau, and, we've gotten some pretty good settlements in those cases. And there's even some 7-figure jury verdicts on those around the country. And what you'll find, the credit bureaus, all they match is the name, the first and last name. Well, if you have a name like Jim Jones, that's completely reckless to just assume that those are the same people, because there's hundreds of thousands of Jim Jones.
Yes.
So yeah, those are all over the place.
That's crazy to me. And there's no way to really defend against a kind of these mixed claim things, right? These mixed files. You're not going to know until it happens. So you can't really do anything on the front side on those, can you?
Not really. All you can do is just kind of monitor your credit reports. Mm-hmm. But yeah, one of the most famous mixed files cases of all time is out of Oregon. There's a lady named Angela Williams. And apparently there was another lady named Angelique Williams. And Equifax had mixed their files for something like 30 years. She had been battling it for 30 years. She had mounds and mounds of paperwork. And eventually she found a really good attorney in Portland, and they won a jury verdict of $18 million. And
wow.
They showed that Equifax had known about this for decades. See, the other interesting thing about this is all of these credit bureaus have been fined by the government going back to the 90s for doing mixed files, because they could easily eliminate the problem. All they have to do is require 9-for-9 social match, and the whole problem would go away. But they don't want to do it because it costs them too much money.
To make the change, or?
Well, it's more because their customers are the banks who buy these reports. They want to give the banks the maximum information. So they would rather give them more information than less and let the bank kind of figure out if it's theirs or not. So they're more concerned that if they did a 9-for-9 match, they might miss an account to include on there. That's at least their defense. It doesn't really make sense, but
wow.
It's more profitable for them to do it this way. So that's why they do it.
And they're willing to pay the price if they get sued, because they're going to win a lot more than they lose.
Yeah, they basically just look at it. I mean, they make so much money. I think it's in the billions net, per quarter, but they have almost no overhead because everything's automated. And so, yeah, they've just made a business decision that it's cheaper to just settle the few times they get sued than to change their practices.
Goodness. Speaking of that, you mentioned that some of these big players like this, whether they be credit card companies, other big corporate, knuckleheads, that they have tactics and strategies to go through this process. That you just shared one strategy. Mm-hmm. There's some others that people can or should know about of what's going on behind the scenes that is putting basically their financial health and their financial profiles at risk, so that people could be aware of that?
Yeah. Well, probably the biggest thing that I've seen on that front, so when you have false information reported on your credit report, And it could be, there's a number of different things that could be false. It could be identity theft. It could be a mixed file. It could be that you really weren't late, but they're reporting you as late. We've got many of those cases too. When you dispute it with the credit bureaus, what's supposed to happen under the law is they're supposed to perform an investigation, which includes them reviewing everything that you send them. They're supposed to also contact the bank or whoever's doing the reporting, review everything that they send them, and then they're supposed to decide if it's true or not and then correct it or not. Well, what we found is they don't do that because it costs money to hire people to do that.
These people, and it takes time.
So what they've done is they've set up shop in some of the poorer countries in the world, and they've sort of exploited the native populations there, and they've created almost factories where people are supposed to do quote unquote investigations. And they make something really, small. I forget what they pay them, but it's like, $2,000 a year. It's something insane. And these people have to crank out so-called investigations, and they can spend about a maximum of 2 minutes per investigation. So they never do anything. And so they just kind of rubber stamp it and say, oh, it's correct. And then they do send, like in the 2 minutes, the only thing they do is they'll send an electronic message to the bank that says, hey, this person's disputing it. What do you say? And whatever the bank says, they just copy. So it doesn't even meet the dictionary definition of investigation. Well, what's interesting is now a lot of the banks are now doing the same thing. So they're also doing fake investigations. And so you go through this process, which can be incredibly frustrating, where you have clearly false information. You dispute it. Your dispute goes all over the world to all these different countries. And then they just write you back and say, we verified that it's you. And then you do it again and nothing happens. And you do it again and nothing happens. And for most people, you have to, once you have false information on your file, you basically have to file a lawsuit to get it off.
And that's where you come in.
Yeah, that's when I come in. I come in when people have done their fourth or fifth dispute and every time just gotten some nonsense response. And then they start wondering, like, what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah. Is there anything in the insurance world for cars? You'd mentioned earlier about the property damage on a car and how they're trying to get it fixed but not fixed. Is there anything where someone has the loss of a car in a car crash and the insurance company takes the car, and the offer that they make to the person who owned the car, it's by whatever valuation system and it's really low?
Yeah.
And then someone else says, I don't think that's fair. I think that's too low for my car. And then they start negotiating or whatever. But is that a problem, or is that part of things usually, they take this algorithm and they do the thing? Is that anything that would be a consumer protection deal as well, or not so much?
Yeah, it would be. Any kind of lowball offer from an insurance company, assuming you can prove that they did it intentionally, which that's why they're doing it, right? Yeah, that would be a type of bad faith. And you do see that with the values sometimes, because the algorithms they use to establish the value is kind of based on some false assumptions to get the price lower. But what I see more often is false estimates of repairs. So we see, a legitimate body shop would say, this vehicle needs, let's say, $35,000 in repairs, and they're following the manufacturer's guidelines, because the manufacturers have publications that say the vehicle needs to be repaired in this way in order to function under the warranty and in order to be safe the way we designed it, And then you have insurance companies trying to cut corners, saying, no, the manufacturer, they don't know what they're talking about. That's not how you do it. We know how to do it. And they'll take shortcuts to get that estimate down to $8,000. And then what you'll find is that those repairs, the thing's a death trap. And basically, there's a lot of vehicles with structural damage, like frame damage, unibody damage, and they'll just fix the outer body and they won't even address the frame damage, or they'll do a completely improper repair and they'll just weld the frame, which, most manufacturers do not allow that.
Right.
And so we've seen many cases where they've done that. So anytime an insurance company's trying to get you to take it to what they call their preferred shops, it's almost always a scam, and I would never do it, because those shops are basically captive of the insurance companies, and they're just going to use whatever estimate the insurance company comes up with.
So that's an incredible piece of advice. I hope anyone watching or listening pays attention to that if your car is involved in any kind of a crash or an accident, that you need to at least get a couple of opinions and estimates. If the insurance company says send them to company A, okay, you're going to do that for one estimate, but then you're going to take them to an independent shop and get that other estimate, knowing that you have the right as a consumer to take that anywhere you want. You're not required or bound by law to take it to their recommended shop, correct?
Right. Yeah, it's actually illegal for them to steer you to their preferred shop. They can clearly tell you it's voluntary, but a lot of them will say, oh yeah, it's better to take it there because we work with them all the time, and everything's streamlined, and it's going to save you money, and therefore it's going to save us money, and then we pass on our cost to you, which, by the way, is nonsense. Whatever cost they save is going in the CEO's bank account, not being passed to you. But yeah, you got the right to take it wherever you want, and you should look for body shops that are independent of insurance companies and not captive to insurance companies. And there's some of those out there.
Yeah, that's gold tip for everyone. Gold tip right there. What about, let's transition gears a little bit. So many people, especially as we get older, fall prey to scams. We'll just call them scams on phone, now by text or by email. Hey, I just need this. Can you help me with that? And the next thing you know, you're down some rabbit hole giving financial information. Any ones that you're seeing right now that are particularly devastating with respect to either how tricky they are or the amount of financial ruin they cause? Anything that you're seeing on that front? And what do people do to protect themselves from those kinds of things?
Yeah. Well, and those ones are really tricky under the law, because if you voluntarily give somebody your banking information, the judges are generally going to be a little more hostile to your case, as opposed to if somebody got your information from a data breach or something. But there is some circumstances where you can still have some remedies. But I would generally say almost never give that information out over the phone unless you're absolutely sure who you're dealing with. But if you ever receive like a panic call from somebody that they claim to be somebody and they need you to wire them money right now, it's almost always a scam, and don't do it.
Yes. And the other one of those is, hey, we know that you've not done something, and if you don't respond in the next 24 hours, we're the IRS, right? You seen that
right.
one? We're the IRS.
Yeah.
And if you don't do this by here and give us this information, we're going to garnish your wages, or we're going to debit your bank account or something. Tell us a little bit more about that one. That's another common one that I've seen.
Yeah, no, we actually get calls from that all the time, where people think it's a real collection agency, and a lot of these people are terrified, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to jail, or they're going to garnish me. And we have to tell them, no, it's a scam. Don't do that. But yeah, that's not, the IRS is never going to call you and tell you that. That's not how
you'll always get that scary little IRS logo in the mail, right?
Right.
That's what you'll get there. You won't get a text or a phone call.
Right. And same thing as sort of a spin-off on that is we see that a lot, where people will call up and pretend to be a collection agency, and they'll say, hey, you owe this bill, and if you don't pay it, we're going to have you arrested. We're sending the sheriff out. We're going to empty out your bank accounts. I mean, that's always going to be a scam too.
How many of these people get caught? Do you know? Like, are they so sophisticated on retracing numbers and all that you can't follow these things back? Because obviously now our phones tell us what number came in. And
Right.
so can you retrace that, or do these things just, because they're always going to pop up, but do they ever get shut down? Are there busts in place, or do the people just like get away with this all the
Yeah,
time?
for the most part, they get away with it. I mean, you occasionally see some situations where law enforcement catches them. But the hard part is numbers can be spoofed, and they're really good at doing that. So, like, the number that appears on your phone when they call is probably not their real phone number. And it also gets more complicated now because a lot of people are doing this maybe in a different country, or, I mean, they could be anywhere,
Wow. And it brings back a common theme that we've talked about on at least two parts of the show already, which is you got to protect yourself. You got to be smart. And so when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And when something seems like the sky is falling and you have no idea what's going on, it probably isn't, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
understanding that both sides of that, and just try to keep a level head. My advice would be try to keep a level head, ask good questions, do some due diligence. If nothing else, call someone like you to ask what's going on.
Right.
In fact, one of the things that I saw on your website that really made me kind of chuckle and go, at the same time, is people who are inadvertently pronounced dead, who are not
Right.
dead. Talk about that issue, and what is that a big deal if it happens, or is it just a nuisance, or all of a sudden maybe someone gets a bunch of money because their name is the same as the deceased and they show up in a will or get checks? Like, what happens in a mistaken death situation?
Yeah. Well, the most common thing that happens is it's generally part of a mixed file situation. So we'll see that a lot where somebody with a similar name will pass away, and then that death gets reported on the other person's credit report. So then all of their creditors get notified that they're dead, and then they'll shut off all their credit cards, and I mean, it could be a real nightmare. But what's funny about those, well, I say funny, but it would be funny if it wasn't so harmful. But we then have these people, they dispute, and they write letters to Experian, Equifax, and they say, I'm not dead. I promise I'm alive.
I'll call you. I'll video con.
Yeah. And they'll send them pictures and say, look, this is me at a baseball game yesterday. And the amazing thing is Experian and these guys, they'll write them back and say, we've performed our investigation and we've determined you're dead.
They do not say that.
And they'll write them again. And so then when you sue them and you're, it's like you're asking the company questions like, did you think you were writing letters with a ghost, or like, who are you communicating with,
That's insane.
Yeah. I mean, that's how bad their policies are.
Wow. And you can usually get those rectified pretty simply once you get you involved, I imagine, compared to that other nonsense.
I mean, once you sue them, they'll get it fixed, and then it just becomes, was it a violation? I mean, they'll usually have some excuse. They'll try to blame one of the banks, and they'll say, oh, well, it was Capital One. They were the ones that reported it to us, and then we just followed what they said, and.
Yeah. Oh, man, I'm so thankful that you're here doing what you're doing. I want to ask you about this one. Solar energy scams. You had put that in your website, and I was fascinated by that because obviously right now we're all trying to take care of the planet. We're trying to do what's right. We're trying to, recycle. And one of the big ways that we can, save money on our energy and also be kind to the planet, presumably, is solar. So what are the solar energy scams that our listeners and our viewers should be watching out for?
Well, the biggest one that I've seen is there's companies that they falsely misrepresent to people. They'll say, and they usually sell by door knocking. So they'll come knock on the door and they'll say, oh, yeah, we're with this company. And there's this great program where the government pays for you to get solar on your roof. And all you got to do is like sign here, and it'll usually be on a tablet. And they'll make the screens move really fast, and they'll get these people signing up. A lot of times this happens with elderly people, and they'll just be like, sign here, sign here, sign here. And what these people don't know is that they've just docu-signed a loan application for $30,000, $40,000, and then then they install these solar roofs, and all of a sudden they're getting monthly bills for, $900 to $1,000 a month, and they have no idea what it is. And so, yeah, we see that, and we see other just blatant misrepresentations about the benefits of how much it'll save them. We've seen a lot of cases where they've installed it and it doesn't work, and they just sort of vanish.
If that's the case, and someone puts a solar system on someone's house and they did sign a loan document as opposed to one of these agreements that will rev share the energy, surplus, we'll do all this, we'll bank energy for you, yada yada. If they do that, and you get involved, is that a case where then that money is forgiven, or hey, they come and take off those panels and then the contract is nixed? What's the result of having you involved in a situation like that?
Yeah, normally on a situation like that, we would nullify the contract. They would take the panels back if they want them. Sometimes they say it would actually be more expensive for us to do that, so we'd rather just leave them there. And then depending on how far it goes, sometimes we're actually looking at having them pay the victim some money as well.
I want to talk about another one, and maybe this is a Colorado thing or maybe it's national. By the way, can you as Matt, can you operate in multiple states? Do you have to be licensed in the state you're operating for this kind of law, or is it a thing like immigration, say, where if you're licensed as an attorney, you can do immigration law in any state in the country?
Yeah, so you do have to be licensed in each state, but so I'm only licensed in Colorado, but I get asked by other attorneys to come try their cases. So sometimes I go to other states and just I can get admitted for one case only. So I may go to California and try a case, or I may go to Texas and try a case for somebody. And even if I also know the people that are like me in almost every state. So for anybody that has issues in other states, if I can't help you, I can at least put you in touch with the right person. So.
Nice. So now back to my question, the Colorado lemon law for cars. Explain to people, I think most of us, if we've been around at all, we know what a lemon car is, what that means. It's a car that it looks one way and it's performing another, or it keeps having serial issues or that kind of thing.
Right.
Tell us about that process with respect to consumer protection.
Yeah, so actually Colorado has the worst lemon law in the country. So we actually don't even use it. So Colorado is the only state in the country, if you buy a lemon and generally it applies to a new car that breaks down, 4 or more times in the first year, or it's in the shop more than 30 days. If that happens to you, and say you sue Ford or Chevy or Hyundai, whoever it is, if you lose in Colorado, you have to pay all of their attorney's fees, which would be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow. So it's really putting people off from suing, because it's not worth the risk unless you're really sure.
Right. Yeah, because you'd be insane to risk getting hit with $200,000 in attorney's fees for a $20,000 car or whatever. But the good news is there's a federal statute called the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. So that's what we use in Colorado. And it basically is the same thing. If a car, really any consumer product over $20 comes with a warranty, if it doesn't work, you do have to give them a chance to fix it. If they refuse to fix it, or they cannot fix it for whatever reason, then you can go ahead and sue them and get your money back and get attorney's fees.
Does that account or apply to private parties that might sell a car from one person to another as well, if they're not offering a warranty? If I'm selling my car to you and you didn't go take it to get it examined by a mechanic and you pay me $10,000 for the car, and then it's all of a sudden a big problem, is it a buyer beware situation, or do these laws have any consumer protection for private to private?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily automatically buyer beware, but most of the consumer laws would not apply. So most of the consumer laws apply to business or people that are in the business of selling cars. But there's always good old fraud. So if somebody off of Craigslist sells you a car for $10,000 and it turns out to have whatever problem, say it was a rebuilt wreck or a flood car or has all these mechanical problems, if you could prove they knew about it and didn't disclose it, you would still have some remedies. Because the law in Colorado is, one good thing about the sale of cars in Colorado is if the seller knows about a major problem, they must disclose it to you.
And does that fall under kind of car dealership fraud and scams? Are those the major types with there, or is there other things that people should look out for when buying a car from a dealer?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a ton of fraud by car dealerships. And yeah, that's another area that we do. And there's so much fraud in that area that I could probably talk for 10 hours on that. But to simplify it, the most common fraud we see is the sale of undisclosed rebuilt wrecks. So it's a multitude of problems, but the first problem is that there's a lot. What most people don't know is Carfax is wildly inaccurate.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, most people think, you just get the Carfax. Well, next time you buy a Carfax report, read the very last sentence on the last page. It's really tiny and it's hard to see, but it basically says, don't believe anything on here. We're not guaranteeing that this is true. And I can't tell you how many cases I've seen where, for whatever reason, the accident is not on Carfax. So we've seen cases where it takes Carfax 7 years to report accidents. We've seen cases where accidents were just never reported at all, which could be for a variety of reasons.
Does that make Carfax liable outside of the dealership? So the dealership does this and that, and they don't report a rebuilt or a flooded car. Does Carfax have any, or with that tiny little statement, does that release them from that? Like, hey, don't believe anything, it's just a guess. And if you get that, then you assume that you know that stuff's not valid information?
Yeah. Well, that it's kind of a gray area in the law. I mean, in my opinion, it's false advertising on their part because they have all this stuff like, just look for the Carfax and ask the dealer for the Carfax. And they have that silly fox on the commercials and stuff. And then the report kind of says the polar opposite of that. Like, hey, don't believe anything we say. We're not guaranteeing anything. So in my opinion, yes, though it's kind of up in the air. I don't know any court has definitively decided that, right now. But I know they have been sued in a few class actions. I think one was in Ohio for that. And that might have actually led to the disclosure. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, so anyways, the reason I mention that is because a lot of people will get a clean Carfax from a dealer and just assume that it's correct and that vehicle may be in an accident. But yeah, we see that all the time where somebody buys a car from a dealer, there's no disclosures at all, and then they say the car breaks down a year later, they take it to their mechanic, and their mechanic says, oh my God, I can't believe you're actually driving this. This thing has frame damage. If you got in an accident in this, you'd be dead. We see that case. I probably get 10 calls a week on that case.
Wow. Is there any protection for a consumer from that process other than buying a brand new car, which you would assume hasn't been wrecked? I mean, maybe that's not even a fully correct assumption. Maybe something could happen on the assembly line or something, but is there anything, if you go to some businesses, they have the nice shiny sticker from the Better Business Bureau says we're a rock star business. Is there any certification, anything that a dealer would have, or is there any protection that I as a consumer go like, before I buy this car from you, I need to make sure it hasn't been in another wreck, there's no frame damage, it's not been flooded, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. Well, probably the best thing you could do is you should have a body shop inspect. Well, you should really have a body shop and a mechanic inspect it.
Even from a dealership?
Yeah. Because,
important note, people.
Yeah, don't, because first of all, I mean, I didn't learn this until I started doing these cases, but there's mechanics who can't spot prior accidents and they have no idea what to look for. There's different certifications. So mechanics have the ASC certification and the body shops have a different certification. And the body shop people probably can't tell the mechanical issues. So that's why you kind of need both of them. But I would have them look it over and tell you that. I wouldn't believe. Oftentimes you see dealerships say, oh, our cars, they go through a rigorous 150-point inspection and all this nonsense. I can't tell you how many cases I've seen where these dealerships have sold people frame damaged cars. And then I'm like taking their deposition and I'm showing them the 150-point inspection. And it's like, hey, the frame is .73 and there's a hole in the frame,
Yeah.
How did you not see it? And they just kind of say, oh, I don't know. I didn't see it.
Must have missed it.
Yeah, maybe I forgot to wear my glasses that day. They come up with all kinds of stories,
Wow. So I am so intrigued by this conversation, man. So intrigued. I could go for hours. And I'm sure that anyone watching this has been like blown away by not only the advice on what to do and what not to do, but what's going on out there. So I want to ask you one more, so I don't keep you here all day.
No,
but
sure.
But this has been fascinating. And for those of you watching and listening, this is an episode that you're going to want to take notes on and you're going to want to share with somebody, because everybody needs protection. We're all in this together. And so the more we hold people accountable, not only does it benefit us and our families, but it's going to benefit these other folks to make sure they start doing things right, But anyway, enough of my soapbox. So much shopping is done online these days. A lot. It's $1 trillion or something for all online shopping. I don't know what it is, but it's a lot of money. Mm. Is there something that we should do to protect ourselves to make sure that we're either getting what we're paying for, that we're not being scammed, or is that a big problem? Is online shopping, is it a potential for consumer fraud?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways, but the biggest thing is if you pay with a credit card and the whatever you bought doesn't work as advertised, you have the right to dispute that with your credit card company. And that's a legitimate dispute, that it doesn't work as they promised under the Fair Credit Billing Act. The key is you have to act quickly. So it's got to be within 60 days of it appearing on your statement. So on that side of it, yes. And then also just with the fraudulent transactions in general, because of online shopping and online everything, the fraud and the identity theft is through the roof these days, because it just makes it that much easier,
to hack into the system and get vital information.
Right. Man, we've seen people that have had apartments rented in their name, which was done all online by thieves. We've seen houses rented in people's names without their knowledge, because these thieves were able to get a copy of their ID and they just submit it online with an online application. And
I said I was going to stop with that last one, but I still can't, right? I'm like crazed by this information. I've been hearing radio ads on the stations that I listen to, and they are advertising, protect yourself against mortgage theft. And essentially what I think it means is people are stealing the person's mortgage stuff and either taking out seconds or they're doing something against mortgages. Is it really that big of a problem as what we're seeing or what I'm hearing radio advertisements about? And if so, can you explain anything to that? Did that make sense? Because I don't know if I'm describing it correctly.
No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So there's a couple different frauds on that front. So the first one is where somebody forges a deed from you to them, and then they file it with the government recorder, and then the county now thinks that person owns it, and then they can go to a bank and say, I want to take out all these loans. So that's one thing. I don't think it's super prevalent, but it does happen, and yeah, it's a nightmare to undo all that, but it can be done.
Any way to protect yourself on that particular one?
Well, that one you can monitor. Every county in America has a tax assessor's website that you can put in your address and check and it'll tell you who the owner is. So just check and make sure you're the owner. Probably every couple months would be the best thing. And I've heard those ads as well. I don't know I don't know anything about that company, but it might be something to look into. And then the other type of theft that I've seen is something called a foreclosure rescue scam. We've actually done a lot of these cases as well. Usually the way it works is these scam artists will go find people in foreclosure that have lots of equity, and then they'll go knock on the door and they'll say, hey, we see you're $20,000 behind on your mortgage. Well, we want to help you save your house, so we'll loan you $50,000 so you can pay $20,000 to the bank and get current, and we'll give you an extra $30,000 for your credit cards, medical bills, whatever you need. Well, then what they do is they prepare documents that say that they're selling them the house for $50,000 instead of doing a loan, and then they have all these elaborate schemes to get people to sign it. I mean, it normally works against the elderly or people that are vulnerable for whatever reason, and they'll trick them into signing documents saying that they're selling it to them for $50,000, and then they try to evict them and throw them out on the streets. And we've unwound 4 of those deals in the last year and saved people's houses and actually got them some money too. So
right. And just to be clear for those people watching or listening, when we say selling them their houses, if that was being perpetrated on me, then that document would be, I'm selling you my house for $50,000. You now own the house. Not that they're giving me $50,000,
right,
but they say they're giving me $50,000 to take care of the behind payments and whatever extra I need. But in actuality, the document says, oh, you're selling me your house for $50,000,
right,
which
right.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Man, oh my goodness, Matt, this has been, for me, one of the most eye-opening shows that I have done in a long, long time. And I can't thank you enough. If people need to contact you because they've felt like they have gone through this, whether it's recently or in a little bit back, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Probably to call us. So it's 303-759-7018.
Okay.
And that's also takes text messages. So you could text us or call us at that number.
And what about your website?
Website is www.mrosbornelaw.com.
Okay, got it. And final question for you. Throughout your lifetime to this point, has there been one piece of advice you've ever been given or nugget that you've learned that you've really incorporated as to the foundation of who you are, what you're doing, what you're about, that you'd like to share with our people?
Yeah. Well, let me think for a minute here. Well, one thing that strikes me, it took me a while to learn this as a lawyer, but my mom used to always tell me when I was a kid that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And I always thought it was kind of annoying, and I'd be like, Mom, whatever. But I've really found that to be true, especially as a lawyer. You know, if you're nice and you treat people with respect, you get so much more results than if you come in as angry and rude and nasty to people, and even my opponents are more willing to work out good deals because I'm not a jerk to them. I treat them with respect, even if I personally disagree with the things that they do. So,
man, that is great. Well, this has been such a joy for me, Matt. Such a great investment. And I can't thank you enough for sharing all this wisdom and insight with me and with us. Again, folks, this is one that you want to listen to, write down some steps to protect yourself, and then share this with others. This should be a huge, huge episode that gets shared with folks. But if you have any questions, give Matt a call. And remember, this podcast is all about making a difference. So, Matt, you're making a difference. I want to let you know that. Thank you for that. And for those of you out there watching, listening, please continue making a difference in your lives as well. So until next time, have a great day. Matt, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.